that we have. I know that I had sent something out about perhaps watching a portion of the board meeting, and for those of you who weren't able to do it, I'm going to do some speed talking summary of that in just a moment. So if we take a look at what we have, we know we have this very talented group here with us this evening. Many thanks. I really appreciate the fact that all of you are giving up your time to help us in this manner. We talked about our goals. Our goals remain the same from when we first started working together, believe it or not, months ago, guided by our 5 values. And then, of course, throughout this school year, also using some very specific guiding principles to help us make sound decisions. And then we know that the purpose of the medical working group is to share your professional suggestions and input on how we can best get our students back into school safely and keep them there safely. And thus far, we have been successful with that. Now, what you may not know is that there's actually a published agenda for this meeting. It's a public meeting, and when there's public meeting, there is an opportunity for public comment. Specifically, when it's an online meeting, we ask that public comment is sent to us via email to be read at the meeting. So there was one message to be read this week, so I'll now take just a moment to read that to you as part of the agenda for our publicly noticed meeting. And here we are. Dear Dr. Bergstrom and Oregon School District Medical Working Group members, thank you for your time and energy put into helping make the right decisions for our children and for our district. On February 8th, when students returned to in-person learning, choir remained virtual. Seeing what was once my daughter's favorite time of the day become her least favorite has been heartbreaking. The facts. January 11th, the school stated, Public Health Madison-Dane County rules do not allow singing in a school setting at this time. January 12th, I verified with Public Health. The entity that the school has relied upon to make decisions allows singing in the classroom. January 13th, the school referenced DPI. DPI allows singing in the classroom, though mentions the concern of aerosols. January 20th, the school referenced the International Coalition of Performing Arts aerosol study. The video that accompanies the third report from November 2020 includes scientists stating that any increase in aerosols created when making music are negligible when wearing a mask, and that the level of aerosols produced is equivalent to those of talking in a mask. The school also referenced an opinion in support of keeping choir virtual. No one can argue that singing in a mask is ideal, but let's remember that this is not just about the instruction, it is also about the building of the community and the mental health benefits that go along with physically being together and creating music. As our athletes have returned to practices and competitions, and our students have returned to in-person classes, please remember our student musicians, like my daughter, who are sitting at home in front of a screen, singing by themselves on mute with no one to hear them. I believe in science. I believe in consistent decision-making. I believe in transparency. Please bring our choir students back immediately and let our children sing. Thank you, Sarah Damazet. That was the public comment portion of the evening. Now I'll move on to additional slides. You can see from our data dashboard that things are going really well in the school district right now. We are definitely reflective of the lower case counts in our community. So you can see that there are several zeros in important places and less than 5 cases in other columns. And as of Friday at noon, there were 40 students overall in quarantine across the district. And we don't separate quarantine from isolation, just so you know, we put them all together. So our agenda for this evening, first we'll do some informational updates from the group. We'll review our agenda from the last time, just to refresh your memory, share updates from Order 14, and then go through our 4 questions. So I'll work through this a little bit, and then when I'm done with giving you just a little bit of background information, I will pass it off to Drew Howard to facilitate the rest of the evening. So the first thing in our agenda, and this is actually a little more participatory, and that is based on your professional experiences over the past month, is there any new information you would like to share that would benefit the members of the working group and their work tonight or their work moving forward? So I'll stop. Here's the participation component. Is there anything that anyone would like to share? I will bring up something that I'm curious to know how many of you have had a chance to read it. And that is the study from Massachusetts that just came out, 500,000 students, almost 100,000 staff, 3 feet of distance versus 6 feet of distance. How many of you have had a chance to take a look at that? Couple hands up. Good. Anyone have any comment on that at all? And if your hand is raised because you would like to speak, keep it raised. Otherwise, I was assuming some people were raising it to say, hey, I read it. Anybody have any comments on
it? Happy to help out here, Leslie. It's a reasonable study. If you put it in, since the public comment brought up medical evidence, if you put it into a medical evidence framework, you would say that it would be considered low to very low quality evidence. And that simply goes to the fact that it's an observational study as opposed to a randomized controlled trial. And there are probably some biases built into it. But that being said, that's what we have. And I think it's a reasonable bit of information to go. We have very little comparison. And it also ties in with standards elsewhere. So I think it's a very reasonable study to use and base policy on.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Bisgrove.
Yeah, sorry, I'm off because I'm also having dinner. So one of the things I read this study, I'm guessing it's the one I sent you. One of the things I did note that I was looking for is correlating it to the Oregon school district. As best I could tell from the study, and John, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but looking at the study, the best correlation was between was K to 6. I could not see, like they were talking more about how they kept the kids in the same groups. I couldn't find a comparison to what happens when you start switching classrooms. And because that's a different situation. So that was one of the things that I didn't know if we could answer or not.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge is here they're looking at one comparison between 3 and 6 feet, and everything else is kind of out the window. But I think the take home is that reducing the distance is safe as long as other measures are enacted, and particularly the masking, but they also mentioned cohorting as well. So I think those are all things to keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, other than the study, does anyone have anything to share? Dr. Schmidt, is your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's not like any piece of data or anything from a study, but I just wanted to share a little bit of still what I see taking care of kids in the hospital whose parents are still not signing releases of information to the school systems. And I just bring that up because I've had some conversations with some people in the schools who continue to tell me that numbers haven't increased. There isn't an increased need for mental health services. And again, it's so hard to know if we're not able to communicate with the schools who is actually struggling. So again, not unique to COVID. I'm sure that happens prior to COVID as well. But again, just that awareness that there are a lot of kids who are still struggling currently, that we can't really communicate to the schools about that.
Thank you. You've said before, sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
So I think that's the case with what you just shared again. All right. Thank you, everyone. And then I will move on to the next part, which is a summary of our February 15th meeting, where we talked about Emergency Order 13 and the new CDC guidance, which was really had a lot of 6 feet was thrown out all over it. But they also said that teachers don't have to be vaccinated. So now that teachers are vaccinated, or will be shortly, because we are well on our way, then I'm curious what happens then. Of course, we're still primarily concerned about the health and safety of our kids, but of course it does leave a lot of questions. And then we shared themes from the informative interviews. And so that was the last time we were together. Now, since then, we've had emergency order number 14. And as you know from that, the face covering requirement stays the same. They also said that employees must maintain 6 feet of physical distance. Part of what was shared was that when school transmission was taking place at schools throughout the country, it was primarily staff-to-staff transmission. And then the big piece, they stated when 6 feet of distance is not possible for students, ensure groups are as static as possible and restrict mixing as much as possible. So it used to be to the greatest extent possible, and 6 feet was really considered a mandate. Now the 6 feet is, they say, with cohort, then it's also sort of turned into a recommendation. So I think the door's open for considering other things, and that's one of the key pieces that we will be discussing tonight. And then they also gave some great advice on the use of common areas and how to keep groups from mixing if you're using larger common areas. So an update on our vaccinations, as I said, it's going really well. Tier 1A is complete, and Tier 1B, people have been either going to Walgreens or to the Alliant Energy Center beginning last week on the 9th. And so if you go to the Alliant Energy Center, you are receiving the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson shot, so that's a one and done. So we're getting close, and we certainly will be in a very good place by early April. So our reopening plans, as you can see, we've added a couple of more chevrons. So we have a grades K-6 in person for 4 days a week as a next step, and expanding 7-12, the flipped model, expanding the number of days students are in school for a half day. So I'm going to just go really quickly through that, because I'm sure that a lot of you already saw this information in the board meeting recording, or perhaps you watched it that evening. So for K-6, what we are proposing, we'd like your feedback on, is in-person instruction 4 full days a week, keeping students in static cohorts throughout the day, some variation on that when it needs to be for the sake of individualized programming. Using all the health and safety protocols that we're currently using that align with public health guidance. We will be serving lunch for our K-6, and we've developed protocols for that, and I'll discuss that in a moment. And we will have recess too, and we'll be outside whenever possible. As a matter of fact, this time of year, other than strange things like the snowstorm today, hopefully in the next month, we'll be outside quite frequently. So what are we doing? Well, our students will be spaced as far as possible. As a matter of fact, at the elementary level, we feel very confident that we'd be 5 feet student to student in most classrooms. I'd say in grades 5 and 6, there may be a classroom or two that gets down to 4 feet. Face coverings, of course, are required. Our recess period has zones, so the cohorts would play in zones and move through the zones together. So we'd be keeping the cohorts really, really fairly static. And lunch would be in the common area with cohorts separated, kids facing forward, and the food, if you're taking a hot lunch, the food being brought to you, no standing in line. So it really won't be the highly social lunch period like our kids are used to. but it would be a way to modify that time period to keep it safe. And of course, cleaning and disinfecting procedures, all the enhanced ventilation and air filtration we've already been doing, as well as assigning entrance doors to different grades. We of course have our illness isolation room as required, and continuing to limit non-essential visitors. Transportation will go through a change also. Our bus transportation routes, when we go to the K-6, being in school for more days, those routes will need to be rebuilt. We will still have bus supervisors on most routes. They've been extraordinarily helpful because they also help us with seating charts so that we know who was sitting where and who was next to whom. Because even now, there are some buses where kids are less than 6 feet. But once we bring students in for full days and combine the cohorts, we will definitely have students within 6 feet of one another. It's possible we could even have 2 to a seat on some buses. Consequently, self-transport to school is still highly encouraged. So for grades 7 through 12, this is where it gets very different. And this is where I think your input is needed quite significantly. If you remember, teachers are assigned by subjects and not by students. So it isn't possible to cohort our students. So what we would propose to do, and we'd like your input on it, is we'd like to bring student groups A or B. So the people who either come on, a Wednesday or Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday, putting them all together in one group and having them come 4 mornings a week. So I'll get to that in a second. But what that would do was 6 feet of distance is recommended, but we know that in most classrooms we'd be 5 to 4. So I think that's an important piece for you to know because that's where we really like some of your guidance. And of course, we remain super committed to what is the most effective educational model. And that's one of the reasons that we are choosing, or the reason we're choosing the 8:30 to 12:30, 4 days a week for moving forward. It's because we feel very strongly that the flipped model is educationally will offer the best experience. And it also allows us to offer a high quality experience and not offer lunch, which we know is one of the more challenging times of day to keep our students safe. So that is another bonus to the selection of that particular model, although it was made based on, the decision was made based on its effectiveness. So what would that look like for our 712s? Well, what that means is we'd have in-person instruction Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, every day but Wednesday. You see the hours there. Oregon Online would meet with their teachers in the afternoons. That's an important part of that model selection. Our students, as I said, groups A and B would come at the same time. We would use all the health and safety protocols we're currently using. Would have learning hub options in the afternoon with a lunch option if students wanted to stay, eat lunch, and do work. And we'd continue with the grab and go lunches. And of course, all of this would mean taking our Panther Pledge commitment extraordinarily seriously. Students and staff staying home if they don't feel well. It'll be all the more important if our physical distance is less than 6 feet. So before we get to any of the critical questions that we'll be discussing today, I'm going to pass it over to Drew Howick, and he'll facilitate us from here.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. As Leslie mentioned in the email that she sent, we've got 4 questions for you to weigh in on. So that's a pretty ambitious agenda since we're going to also stay together as a full group for this. In the planning discussions that I had with Leslie, Tim, and Krista, we're thinking that the choir question might go relatively short. And again, on that one, we're inviting those people who have experience or expertise to comment on it. And Leslie will tee up those two questions that were submitted by John Tanner on that. The other two questions on K6 and 712, I'll call out and invite anybody to share their reactions, questions, and suggestions on those two topics. And again, if you do not have expertise or experience with that, no need to contribute, just say pass and we'll continue the journey. And then we'll finish about talking about the spring break question that Leslie submitted as well. Then we'll conclude and talk about the next steps for the medical working group. So Leslie will make some comments about each of these topics before we begin. And I'll do our best to try to keep us moving. And so we're done by 7:15. Okay, Leslie.
Thank you. So for question number 1, as we prepare for more in-person instruction, we absolutely plan to offer in-person choir. What we're really interested in knowing from you is, do you think it's prudent or reasonable to wait for the final release of the aerosol report? Or should we just work with what they have given us thus far? And then if you do believe it's reasonable to proceed with it, are there any safety measures you suggest other than what is suggested in the report, which, John, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe thus far it's masked and 6 feet. Is that correct, John?
Yep. Masked 6 feet outdoors, and in some cases greater distance like 9 feet.
Okay, and I think Minnesota, thank you, Shelley, for sending that to us. The Minnesota guide says 12 feet even. Do people have any helpful suggestions other than that, or want to comment on proceeding prior to the final release of the study? So I take it, I take it based on crickets. Here's what I'm taking. I'm taking that what we have said right now about masking and distancing to be adequate measures based on what you've heard or what you know. I see a thumbs up from Dr. Tempe and a nod from Dr. Bisgrove. So I'm looking around the screen. Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you. We appreciate that.
And we were aware going into this conversation that not everyone would have an opinion or have experience with this, but we did just want to get some feedback before the district moved forward.
And we didn't ask about band, even though we absolutely intend to play band instruments too. But one piece of information regarding band is that the face masks with the slit are not considered to be adequate face masks according to the public health order. Consequently, the rules for band would be that they would have to be, if we're going to play at school, outside in a group less than 50, spaced 6 feet apart. So that's one of the reasons we are ordering some tents, because we're expecting some great weather and some outside band playing. And we'll definitely be having some outdoor singing when the weather is right too. Otherwise, we have a backup plan for that also. All right, here's question number 2. Based on what you have seen from the board report, the little smidgen I said tonight, and your professional expertise, what questions, reactions, and suggestions do you have on the health and safety protocols we are using to support a safe increase in in-person learning time for K6?
So who would like to lead us off with that response? And then I'll, like last time, I'll just go around and call everybody's name on the committee and see if you have a comment you'd like to share.
And Drew, I just want to let you know that Brian Stamm is not here tonight.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Drew. This is Beth Rozak talking. I can go ahead and get us started. Just to
Great.
share what we've learned from the hospital setting, when everyone is socially distanced and wearing masks, they're the most safe. We all know that by now. When we've found spread, it's been in more common areas like we were discussing with eating and with people being together without having masks on. So I would just caution to maybe make an extra emphasis on those type of activities where people maybe are unmasked. And then, obviously keep the kids and the teachers as safe as possible.
Great. Good. Thank you for that. Good. Katie Schmitz, let's go to you next, and then Shelley after that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's my reaction is really positive to getting the kids back with the same safety protocols that are in place. I think they're working well. I hear from teachers that the kids are keeping their masks on. I hear from my kids who are in school that they're keeping their masks on. I feel like it's very well respected. And I think that what we've noticed is that kids do a really good job keeping them on despite some of our early doubts. And because of the numbers and how safe kids have been in school, I think it's good to continue what we're doing. And I love that they're going to get back as, double what they are right now. So I think that's a great plan.
Great. Great. Thanks, Katie. Shelley, and then to Amy.
Yeah, thanks. I think the questions I have are about lunch, wondering kind of what Beth was lifting up in terms of that as a more high risk space, and wondering if folks have considered in the classroom, although I know that probably creates its own logistical problems. I was wondering about the bus and what are our options and how we can keep kids as far apart as possible. And then, I think that also has some equity implications, right? So kids who can't get a ride to work or to school might be kids who have parents who have less flexible jobs. And then I think the other thing is just to make sure we are prepared for, I feel like we have great results right now, but I think just making sure we're ready on the contact tracing front, and that folks don't feel a lot of stigma around that, right? So being able to quickly respond and get lots of good information quickly will help us keep things buttoned up quickly. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
Great. Good information. Thank you, Shelley. Amy, and then Evan.
Maybe more of a question, but as we roll this out, making sure that parents and caregivers are very well informed of what's to come and any changes. I like the points that people are bringing up, like the unmasked, just so the parents have and caregivers have all the information they need to make good choices for their learners.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Evan, and then we'll go to Jill.
Nothing specific to add for me. I think it's great. Excited to see it.
Okay. Thanks. Jill, and then we'll go to Joanna.
I'm wondering about kids using lockers or cubby spaces. That hasn't been mentioned at all. I'm thinking about this in the context of, I guess I'm thinking about it more for the RCI and more for the 5th and 6th graders. One of the cool things about being a 5th and 6th grader developmentally is that you get to be kind of a big kid and you have these new privileges at school and you get to have a locker. And our kids haven't had any of that this year. And with the way that we're talking about lunch, they're still not going to have all the options that you typically get with a la carte and all that fun, cool stuff that you get to do as a 5th grader. So I'm just wanting to consider other ways that we can still make them feel like they're the big kids while being safe. Maybe that would mean lockers. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of other things to help them have a little bit of that experience in the time that we have left.
Right. And the good news is we've talked about how to use lockers, but just not allow students out at the same time so that it's every other locker or every third locker or something to give them a little space.
Great. Thank you, Jill. Joanna, and then let's go to John.
Okay. Sort of following some of the public health chatter in some of the part of the groups, the American Association of Public Health Physicians, and also just listening to some of the other public health experts are saying with regard to cohorting and having kids close together versus further apart. The emphasis really is, like masking, cleaning, and so that always seems to be coming down to the emphasis, which again brings us back to the lunchroom and the eating. One thing to quickly circle back on with regard to band, I know for the fifth graders, because Maya's in band, I know for the fifth graders, they were planning on doing drums last as a way to the kids to have fun, but also then you're not taking your mask off. So I think that was a plan. Another thing to consider is that if we're getting, because we want to use, there's also the talk, if the masks are, like the distancing was when the masks are on, but there's still a lot of, if masks are off, spreading people out. And so if we're getting tents for band, are we then, is it possible then to use the tents during lunch in some cases, or when it's nice outside, get the kids outside, setting, like having kids bring blankets, being outside, having lunch outside, which is good for them anyway. If we're working with our kiddos, get them out more here. But especially as the weather gets nicer when we're looking at lunch, just get to have the kids having lunch outside. They can enjoy being outside, and then it's safer outside when they have, and we can cohort whatever we want, but then we also have more room. So that does seem to be the sort of the crutch point is what happens when the masks come off. Because as far as when the masks are on, if we have good ventilation, if we have good cleaning protocols, those seem to be things that are really have been the things to focus on at this point more than distance. Now, as the data comes in, at least that's what Ashish Jha, who is the dean of the School of Public Health at Brown, was saying, and what I've heard others echo. So.
Thank you.
Right. Good. Thank you for that. John, please, and then Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Not a whole lot to add. I think we're sitting in a very good place right now, both are from local, from statewide, from county, and even nationally. And so I think the proposed measures are very appropriate. They're appropriately measured. They're doable. And I think that looks good. The one thing I'll just toss out is just keeping an eye on our 9-day spring break coming up. We're already noticing a lot more travel in families in the Oregon School District. And a lot of people are concerned about what's happening, particularly in southern states right now in terms of the total abandonment of all measures, and with the propensity for people to travel to those nice locations over spring break, we just have to be cautious for a couple of weeks after the 2nd of April. Thanks.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah, and that's our fourth question today that we'll try to expand on. So that's great. Aaron, let's go to you and then to Raven.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I have anything new to add. I think also that we're in a very, very good place from a masking perspective and all the protocol perspectives that we have in place. I'm eager to see, from a mental health perspective, I'm eager to see students back in school to get the structure and consistency that I think is going to be very, very important here in the next coming months. But I nothing really huge to add.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. Raven, let's go to you, and then Alice.
The only small thing I'd like to add is we talked a lot about lunch and distancing, but also at the K4 level specifically, now that they're going to be in school all day, we need to think about snack and how we're going to facilitate that. And then also rules and regulations around mask breaks for those little kids that are going to be in masks for 8 hours, something we should also consider.
Thank you, Raven. We talked about outside only snacks, and that could also be their mask break. So we're good.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Raven. Alice, and then to Matt.
I don't think I have anything to add on this one.
Okay. Okay. Matt, and then to Becky.
Same. We can move on to Becky. Nothing to add.
All right. We'll move on to Becky then. Becky, and then to Beatrice.
I think that the key point of sticking with the emphasis on the masks is probably the number one thing that we can keep going with. I think another important thing to point out in that study that, it was pre-vaccinations for teachers in that study, and whether or not it was, a good study or not, it just kind of goes to show you that we have vaccinated teachers now, and with proper masking, I think that we can easily cut down on our distancing in the classroom. But other than that, I think all the protocols, I love the Panther Pledge. I think that will come into play heavily with spring break, kind of making our students own if they have an illness when they come back from spring break. I'm kind of torn about needing an additional couple weeks after spring break or not, because I think that people right now have been doing well with that. It sounds like I don't have a kid in the district. I do, but he's in 4K, so he doesn't really count. But and from as far as masking goes, every time I drop him off, those little 5-year-olds have those masks on and they're rocking it. So if my 5-year-old can do it, I think that the kids in the above grades are probably rocking it out too. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks for rocking us out, Becky. Beatrice, and then Eric.
I don't have much to add. I like the idea of keeping the cohorts together for the cafeteria.
Okay. Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. So I just looked at the numbers today from Dane County Public Health, and we're at an amazingly low rate in Dane County right now. We're at about 1% of the tests are coming back positive, which is really, I think, almost an all-time low. So we're in a really, really good place. However, I would just encourage vigilance, with the spring break travel, and also what they're seeing with the variant spikes, the B117 variant in Europe now, where countries are needing to go back into lockdown. I think, we're ahead of where Europe is in vaccination rates, but the variant is here and it is increasing. So I think with that and spring break travel, I think it's just something to keep an eye on closely, as things can change quickly. Otherwise, I'm in agreement with the masking and the distancing protocols that you have in place. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Eric. Any other members of the medical working group who I failed to acknowledge have a comment on K6? All right. Good. Thank you.
Okay.
So let's move on in our grade level.
Now we're going to go to 712, and 712 is different, as you know, because the students aren't cohorted, right? And so public health has definitely said you can do less than 6 feet if you cohort them. But then when it comes to the students who can't be cohorted, they said 6 feet, I think, the language is as much as possible. And that's supposed to be a step down from to the greatest extent possible. So with that slight change in semantics and the fact that things are going well, as has been mentioned, in the community, the county, and the state, and the fact that things have been going very well with our health measures and in-person learning thus far, we would like to be able to take the next step of bringing our middle school and high school students in for that 8:30 to 12:30 shift 4 days a week. But of course, there's concern about that because they won't be 6 feet apart. They will be masked. We will be cleaning the rooms. We will have the air filtration that we have now, which is very, very good, but they will not be 6 feet apart. And that's why everything that people have been saying tonight regarding distancing, I've definitely been listening to, as have, I'm sure, other people who are observing the meeting tonight. So really 712 comes down to the fact, if we aren't having lunch and we're keeping masks on, what advice do people have related to being 4 to 5 feet apart as opposed to 6 feet?
So, Eric, why don't we somewhat reverse order and give you a first crack at this one. Again, questions, reactions, or suggestions. And then Beatrice, you're next.
Yeah, not having read that school study that was just discussed, I believe that must have just came out like in the last day or two. But I'm in support of the standard 6 feet distancing requirements. That's seems to have worked for just about every setting. And of course, in Dane County, we have very low rates, so that's kind of where I would stand with that. I know it's really difficult. But I think wherever possible, I would support the 6 feet distancing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Beatrice, and then let's go to Becky.
Yeah, I think I agree that the 6 foot distance is important, but also, the masking and the sanitizing is just as important. So I think it's reasonable to increase the number of hours for grades 7 to 12.
Excuse me, I'm having thunder outside my window. I'm obviously not in Madison right now, and it's raining like mad here. So, okay, thank you for that. Becky, you're invited to share ideas, and then Alice.
I am in agreement with masking and decreasing the 6 feet distance to get the kids back in school. I think that the most recent study that came out on the 10th from Massachusetts reiterates that fact. I think countless studies have reiterated that fact, that with proper masking and other preventative measures in place, you do not need to be 6 feet apart. And so if that means getting kids back in school quicker with less distance, I am in support of that.
Okay, thanks, Becky. Great. Alice, we'll go to Matt.
I really liked what you were saying when we were talking about the kiddos about being outside whenever possible. And I think we could talk about that for older kids too. And these are kids that have been on screens even more for the last year. And so to the extent that it's not wildly, hitting it for teachers, which it may be, but getting outside as much as possible. And then the only other thing I wanted to say was about teachers, and just that I'm always wondering how this is going for teachers, because they're the ones that can see how all these protocols are sort of playing out at school. So hoping that there's been really active efforts to get input from teachers on this stuff too. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Great insight, Alice. Thank you. Matt, and then we'll go to Amy.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add here from a data perspective either.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. Amy, and then to Raven.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting to think about adding more hours to our 7 to 12th graders. In my interaction with high school students, and while it might be a small percentage, I know the students that are in person, they really appreciate that teacher time, that face-to-face time, where they feel like they can get more direct and like feedback on their questions and things like that. So that is something I think is very valuable. I wonder if there have been other schools, whether it's neighboring states or across the nation, that have already been going less than 6 feet, and how that has been going for any of those school districts, if they've already kind of limit or reduced that spacing. And I also wonder, as we potentially add more students to the classroom, like, is there a max number, even if we reduce the amount of feet to 4 to 5? Like, are we still going to, will there be a cap at some point so it doesn't end up being less than 4 to 5, as well as we are thinking about adding more students? And I love the idea of using our outdoor spaces when possible, keeping in mind teachers too, right? They have a lot to juggle, but I like that idea as well.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'd say that both schools may have some other possibilities if we get a little too tight. And I know that Principal Pleiner's on the call tonight. If he wants to add anything to that, I'd be more than happy for his input too. And then I think Raven, you're next.
Before we do, Amy's question, Leslie, to you or others about other schools.
I would say most of
Do we have any
Wisconsin-
situations where we know that who's done that and what?
Yeah,
Okay.
we do.
Right.
I'd say that a good portion of Wisconsin has not had a 6 feet distancing rule throughout this whole pandemic.
Yeah.
Dane County has been adhering very tightly to that, but they're one of the only counties in Wisconsin doing so.
Yep. Great, thanks. Raven, and then Katie.
My only comment is making sure that the community and like families are aware that because we're decreasing that 6 feet, that we are going to have, and Leslie, I think you alluded to this in the school board meeting, that we are going to have potentially many more close contacts at those 7 through 12, because we could have 4 per classroom. So that puts one positive case at about 16 close contacts in school, and then adding the bus, it could be potentially up to 20. So just making sure aware that we're just doing that for the safety and welfare of our students, but that those numbers, especially on our dashboard, could potentially increase quite a bit just because of that shorter distancing.
Thank you for that good reminder. And it's also a good reminder that I think our nursing staff will need assistance with contact tracing because of the number of calls that will need to be made when more students are in close proximity to one another.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Katie, and then to Shelley.
Yeah, I totally agree with getting the kids back in, and the less than 6 feet doesn't bother me as long as we're really, again, encouraging masking and hygiene. I think the other thing to just make really clear is that our families are informed. So if you're making the decision to send your child back to school, understanding that there could be less than 6 feet between them, that masks are still required, you then have the choice to send your kid to school with that setting in place. And if it's not something that you're comfortable with, you can opt for the online option. So I think, again, I hear a lot about the importance of supporting the online students, and that's obviously very important, but we also have to support the kids who want to be in person, who need to be in person. And so again, parents they're making that decision with information that there may not be the 6 foot restriction. And so again, they're going in with their eyes open. And hopefully by that point, teachers are vaccinated. And so I think there should be some security in that, that things are safer with the vaccinations in place. So I'm definitely in support of it.
Great, thank you, Katie. Shelley, and then Joanna.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what everyone's saying. I think that if it feels like the right time to try this out, I really appreciate the idea of making sure folks are well informed, and then also, watching what we see. If things go well, great. If things don't go well, hopefully we can reassess and take a look at that. And agree with Raven, like making sure that we have contact tracing and the capacity to respond quickly. That's one of our best tools in this, in addition to the masking and the distance. But I'm in favor of giving it a shot.
Thank you.
A couple of things I would.
Shelley.
All right.
Yeah,
Ready?
Joanna, and then we'll go to Jill. You bet. Mm-hmm.
Okay, a couple things I was thinking about in terms of in terms of the 7 through 12 and bringing the distances in a little closer. First of all, there is like my sort of, I guess, my 8th grade and like on the ground intel from like walking through the halls. At least they're already, from what I understand, it's already close to impossible to keep them 6 feet apart because otherwise they're all late to class. So there's already some of that going on, and we haven't seen a ton of transmission. Thing number one, as long as again comes down to masking. Thing number two, yeah, using our outdoor. I definitely agree. Said it before. Using our outdoor spaces as much as possible. Thing number three, something to think about. Starting March 29th, I think it's March 29th. Anyone who's eligible who has a high risk condition, I think starting with like is it, I think, I want to say, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but starting at the age of 18, but also 16 for Pfizer. Kids who have asthma, like basically these start, and then May 1, President Biden is encouraging all states to open up everybody. So it is possible, in addition to our teachers getting vaccinated, we could start seeing some of our juniors and seniors get vaccinated, which would help at the high school. It's obviously going to be difficult because, again, supply and demand, but we might even start seeing, as April and then we come into May, we might even get a chance to start seeing some vaccine penetration into our juniors and seniors, which would help quite a bit as well at the high school level. That was just something I was thinking of that just down the line and hopefully helps us.
Right. Good. Thank you, Joanna. Jill, and then to Erin.
I think it's great for the kids to be returning back to school. I have spoken often in these meetings about my concerns about adolescents, especially their kind of unique situation and how they're not having the experiences and the impact on their mental health and their development. I think in addition to what Dr. Biscoff has talked about in terms of kids not being 6 feet apart when they're in the hallways, I mean, kids at this grade level are also spending a lot of time together outside of school just because of peers. And even if you have bubbles and you have some limits of that, we already are having these kids spend some time together, and they're not 6 feet apart all the time. You can't keep these kids that far apart. So I think we already have seen some of that exposure. And then, of course, we have the sports issue, which has come into play. And yet our numbers have stayed really great. And so I think that just speaks to me that this is how we move forward. It's time. It's definitely time.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Erin, and then to John.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything in all of these meetings since the kids have been back about any concerns regarding non-compliance for wearing masks or hand washing. And so I think that the kids, and what I'm seeing is the kids are doing their part. Everybody's doing their part. And I think the school has made it very easy for parents to say, hey, my kid's not feeling well, and they're keeping them home. And in my experience, I think that is happening also. So I do think it's time to get them back to school, and going closer than 6 feet, I think is fine because they're following all of the other protocols. Again, I really do think we need to acknowledge that people are doing their part the best that they can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thanks, Erin. John.
Yeah, not much to add again. I think just keeping an eye on the Dane County metrics and the 2-week trajectory is kind of key. We're on a downslope here. Once it starts going up, it means we're accelerating again. That means that we're entering a phase of more transmission. We just have to be cautious, but when things are either down or stable, I'm happy with 3 feet as long as we continue masking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, John. Evan, do you have anything to add?
I do. I can answer a question people were wondering about, are there other districts? So there's one site kind of tracking it for the whole country. I'm sure it's yeoman's work to try and collect district level data, but they've got 49% of students are at full day school. And I think it's probably safe to assume anybody in full regular school mode is not keeping 6 feet distance. 30% hybrid, and then 20% virtual. So that's kind of what they're seeing for breakdowns right now. They update it every week. In terms of me as a parent of somebody in this age group, I would tell you that I think the slight increase in perceived risk is well worth the added benefit of more in-person hours. Greatly outweighs the risk.
Okay, great. Thank you, Evan. Did I fail to acknowledge anybody else on the medical working team? Okay. Any comments on the comments? Reactions to what you've heard, or questions of other of your colleagues here before we go to the fourth question? Okay. Hearing none. Great perspectives, good information. Certainly a pattern in the responses that have been made, which is what the district is partially looking for. So Leslie, you want to tee up the fourth question for us?
I do, thank you. So I asked back in very, very early January, it might have been late December, about when we were to bring in our, gosh, I think it was grades 3 through 6. And should we do it right after winter break, or should we wait a couple of weeks post winter break to look at the trends after we know some people have been traveling for holidays? And at that time, the advice was 2 weeks sounds prudent. However, we'd be in a very different place, we think, after spring break related to where transmission is within our county and within our community. So do you still think that 2 weeks is the right way to go, or would 1 week be sufficient post spring break? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on timing, because we want to establish a date for when we make this big shift.
Okay. Evan, since you did a lot of listening last time, why don't we ask you to kick us off here on a response there?
Sure. Well, I'll give you the data perspective. I was looking at this the last few days to try and answer the question. What I can tell you is, concerns around Thanksgiving, concerns around winter holidays. Dane County numbers at the time of Thanksgiving were 7 times higher. Christmas, New Year's time was 3 to 4 times higher than what we're seeing now. And I think you kind of you have a big disruption to testing numbers because of access to it, but you just don't see any disruption to a continued downward trend over that time period. When I look specifically at the school district boundaries for case impact, you can't even pick out any of those holiday travel impacts to within the geographic boundaries of the Oregon School District. And then the last thing I looked at was the 7 counties adjacent. I've got those up on the charts that I put together for the committee. I think Oregon shares a lot in common with the 7 counties, maybe even more so because you've got the university in Madison just makes such a big difference in terms of number impact. When you look at those 7 counties, I've got the age bands for 0 to 9-year-old and 10 to 19. Again, you just don't see any noticeable pickup from winter break in those areas. So I guess from a data perspective, I would say I don't have any concern getting them back as soon as possible.
Okay, good. Why don't we turn to your data partner, Matt, and see if you'd like to share some perspectives on that.
I generally agree with what Evan just said. The one thing I would add is that it's not exactly apples to apples. I think there's a difference right now with everything opening up in the southern states. The travel that the Oregon community will do might not look the same as the travel that they did around Thanksgiving and winter. So we can't just go off that data completely. But I think it is a good starting point. I agree with Evan for the most part.
Okay, thanks. Amy, let's hear from you if we could, and then Alice.
I have nothing to add. I appreciate Evan and the data experts and the medical experts on this one.
Okay, great. Alice, and then to John.
Thanks. I agree with Amy. I'm going to just listen to what the medical experts have to say. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alice. Okay, medical experts. John, let's start with you.
Well, from our studies in the Oregon School District, we know that a 9-day break has a tremendous effect on influenza. Influenza, the generation time from one person to the next tends to be about 3 days. SARS-CoV-2 tends to be more like 6 days. So if you're looking for interrupting things, you want to get at least 2 what we call serial intervals in there, or 2 generation times. That's about 10 to 12 days. I think we just have to be looking at what's happening around the country. And if we're still on a downslope, I think we're looking good. If Wisconsin, Dane County is looking still on that downslope, we're looking good. If we're seeing accelerations, then as a number of other people have mentioned, and as Erica has mentioned with the increasing variant strains out there, then I think we need to be a little bit more cautious. But I think we just kind of play it by ear right now. But right at this point, all the trajectories are looking good.
Okay. So to clarify, John, if you watching it and going into the spring break, that's the area we want to look at prior to it, and then make a decision about how long after spring break people should come back.
Yeah, you know, we still have about, what, 2 weeks until spring break, or, you know, if suddenly we turn around, Dane County, Wisconsin are all on the downslope right now. But if we start seeing acceleration, I'm going to be concerned. I'm hoping we don't. I'm thinking that we're not going to see that. But if we do see that, particularly in this phase when there's been a lot of infection out there and a lot of immunization, if we start seeing acceleration, I would characterize that as being very bad for a number of reasons.
Yep. Okay. Good. Thank you for that. Eric, and then Joanna.
Yeah, I don't really, again, it's really difficult to say. I think that we're in a really good place right now. So I don't really have a date in mind. As John said, the incubation period averages around 5 to 6 days. So if that is going to be taken into consideration, then that's what we know. Thanks.
Drew, or
Thank
coming
you.
out of my end.
Joanna, and then Beatrice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there we go. So yeah, it was basically totally in tune with John and Eric are saying. I think the concern, one of the things, so a couple things we might want to watch for in addition to national trends, also taking a peek at the trends in the states that are now dropping mandates. So those, because again, those are southern states and those are states where people may travel to. And so those might be two separate things to look at. One is national overall, but two, are we suddenly seeing a rapid acceleration in places like Texas and Florida, particularly a place like Florida? It's just kind of something to keep in mind. That's thing number one. Thing number two is that with the cycles, we think about 5 to 6 days. The CDC had previously decreased its recommendation of quarantine for anyone asymptomatic or just exposed to 10 days as opposed to 14. I know the school district, having just gone through quarantine with one child, the school district still sticks with 14, although at SSM we go with 10 because that's the latest data. The final thing is, and this is like the timing of Easter, so beautiful. We've got spring break, but then the very last day of spring break is Easter, which is when the families are going to get together. And so even with all of spring break, people may not go away, but then get together that last day. And so that becomes, to me, if we're going to have a starting point, yeah, that very last day before we come back really is probably one of our key points, because it's a family holiday. People are feeling more confident. Grandparents really want to see their grandkids. So I think there's probably going to be more, I would guess, more family mix, just what I'm hearing just throughout the community, maybe more family mixing than there's been because people are feeling optimistic. And so yeah, watching trends, but I would, at the very least, piecing out not just trends nationally and trends in Wisconsin, but also looking at trends in places where mandates have been relaxed that people may be traveling to, because that's something we want to keep an eye on. If they stay relatively steady or only come up a little bit, we might be okay. But if in those areas we're seeing massive shoot-ups, we might just want to take a pause and take a look. Okay, what's happening next? Because we may see a ricochet effect to other parts of the country then, if the places without mandates now are now starting to shoot up.
Right. Good. Thank you for that. Beatrice and then Shelley.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I agree with Dr. Bisgrove and Dr. Temti.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, I was just jumping in. I think for me, really wanting to set up this next quarter for success and thinking, I feel like waiting 2 weeks makes good sense in terms of really setting us up for success, and our school nurses not up for a whole bunch of contact tracing based on travel, all the things that people have already said. So I'd still vote 2 weeks.
Okay. Thanks, Shelley. Jill and then Aaron.
I thought that Evan's data was really powerful, actually. That was really interesting to me to think about that. And I think also a concern that we had with that Christmas time was our teachers as well. And so if our teachers are going to be vaccinated, I don't think we have to have that same level of concern with them. So the combination of Evan's data with the very low rates among little kids, even up to 18, and the fact that our teachers are going to be protected makes me feel like I want to get them back as soon as possible.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jill. Aaron and then Katie.
I agree. I think the data that has been discussed is very important. I think we're in a different place today than we were back in the winter. I mean, our numbers are down. We have people who are getting vaccinated. We're making global assumptions that everybody's going to be traveling, and I don't think everybody's going to be traveling. There's going to be some people traveling, yes, but I think that, based on the numbers that we're seeing today, again, we're going to continue to monitor them. And if we're going to continue to follow the numbers and the science like we have been, I think that the numbers suggest that we can go back and that there's not really a need to wait for anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Aaron. Katie and then Becky.
Great. So yeah, I totally agree. Obviously there's trends here. So I agree with Aaron and Jill and Evan. I really feel like they could go back April 5th. I mean, mental health standpoint, you guys, another 2 weeks is a huge fraction of the time left. And these kids are not doing well. I think to keep them out for another 2 weeks, just in case numbers go up. And I also feel like we can't then be planful. So if spring break is in 2 weeks, and then we're not going to make a decision on whether it's the 5th or the 12th or the 19th, like families have to plan. We have to be able to give some information. I agree that a lot of families aren't traveling. The other piece is a lot of families are not traveling during spring break. They've been traveling. They're traveling because, let me tell you, it's expensive to travel during spring break. So if they can travel before or after, I think a lot of families are doing that because it's less expensive and they can do their school virtually from wherever they are. So I think, right, teachers are protected. We have to be planful. 2 weeks out of 10 weeks left is a tremendous amount of time. And I really think for the mental health of everybody, we got to get the kids back as soon as we can and not wait for the what ifs. Again, if we see a huge spike in the next 2 to 3 weeks, like, yes, we can adjust, we can adapt. But I think we need to be proactive and get the kids back in school.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. Becky and then Raven.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Katie and everyone who's agreeing to get the kids back right away. I think Katie kind of hit it on the number in saying, people have been traveling, myself included. I got on a plane and I went to Puerto Rico, and that plane was jack full, and people and adults have been traveling since the snow hit the ground. That's when we travel here because we hate it. So I think to say that families are traveling during spring break, yes, some are, but they're also coming from a very COVID conscious state, Wisconsin. And we can't say that these people are not going to enact COVID precautions when they go to these open states where COVID doesn't exist, such as Florida and Texas. So just because I'm a family traveling from Wisconsin, we wore our masks the entire time. We have to kind of take that into consideration as well. And I think along with Evan's data, like Katie said, if there's a huge increase in the numbers, yes, reevaluate. But at this point in time, because a couple families might travel on spring break, I don't think that's enough of a reason to take away 2 weeks of school when there's 10 weeks left.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Becky. Raven and then Beth.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on, like Evan had said that the numbers were a lot lower. We were very much expecting our numbers at the school to go up around Christmas. However, there was a really big push by our governor and by medical providers for people not to travel over the holiday break and over Christmas. And we really didn't see a lot of families traveling over Christmas. And now we know by calling in pre-absences from at school and talking to our families that there is we're hearing more families are traveling over spring break than we heard over the holiday break. So I just want to keep that in mind as well, that we are seeing just from our students and pre-absences that there is going to be just some increase in travel over spring break. I would suggest having at least that week buffer. That gives us, like Dr. Bisgrove had said, that Sunday, if people are getting together, that gives us a good 8 days before students are coming back on that Monday.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Raven. And Beth.
Thanks, Drew. I think it's about all having really good situational awareness. So if we see the numbers go up in the next 2 weeks, we may want to pause and take a longer break than maybe we would before. I think it's really challenging to compare us now. Even I struggle with it, to last December and Thanksgiving, because we were under a different order and we weren't vaccinated. And it's really hard to compare apples to apples. We don't really know what it's going to be like in the next coming weeks. But I think to have just a really good situational awareness so that we know if the states around us or the states in the South are going up, we may want to extend our spring break, even if it's halfway through it. I think the other thing too is that we have a really educated community as well. And just to even push wearing masks, even if you are going to be traveling, I mean, now that it's community spread, you can go to Costco and get it. And if you go to Tennessee or somewhere else, just be very mindful, wear your mask and hand sanitizer, just be really, really smart about it. Just wanted to share with the group, being a director over the pandemic area for the past year, when we had nursing staff wearing masks, hand sanitizing, it's impossible to social distance within a hospital setting. And we didn't get one nurse spread it. We didn't have one nurse spread it to another nurse. Our nurses got it from choices that they were making outside of the hospital in the community. So I think we can just caution people and just, utilize our safe practices that we know that will keep them healthy.
Okay, thank you. I believe that is all the members of the medical working group. Did I miss anybody on that? Okay, great. Well, Leslie, we got answers to your questions.
We surely did. That was very, very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate the input very much. And remarkably well timed. It is 7:13. We have really been good with making sure we start and end on time and hear from all of you, because you all offer a very, very valuable perspective, and I appreciate it very much. And I think that's it. And I would like to say that I'd like to have at least one more meeting. So if you don't mind, maybe we don't need it in 2 weeks, unless there's a spike and I need an emergency set of a group to give me some advice. Then I'll definitely call a meeting and see how many of you I can get on the screen. Otherwise, I think we'll probably just schedule a meeting from a month from today, and we can talk a little bit about the plans and how it's gone.
What, I have my calendar in front. What date is that, Leslie, a month from today?
Oh, well, my goodness, you're going to make me look on my calendar too. Would that be, that would be the 12th. So we might actually kick it out, because that might be a little too early for us to know exactly how it's going. So I'll check. Okay. I'll check with you, Drew, and send something out to the group.
Okay, so we'll follow up with the members and put out a date. Okay, good. All right. Well, I think we've accomplished the 4 questions, and it is 7:14, so we're in good shape. If any observers would like to communicate any opinions or questions, then Leslie is the person to contact, of course, as we have in the past. Other than that, hope you all have a good evening.
Bye now.
Thank you.